be followed by Stefan Kipfer, who researches and teaches social theory, politics, urbanization, and planning in the Faculty of Environmental Studies at York University.
Thanks a lot to Kanishka and Norma for actually having the idea of doing this and for organizing it. Thanks also to my mum, whose birthday it is today, who looked after our son, who's over there, so that we could actually go to Palestine in the summer. Thanks also to Odette Haas and Rotem Eretz, who are somewhere in the room, who actually know something about Tel Aviv, like me, and gave me a number of suggestions before we left. Indeed, I'm going to talk not about the West Bank and not about Jerusalem, but about Tel Aviv, Jaffa, where Karen and I went after the conference was finished. Right? And of course, as in Kanishka's case, I'm riffing off some of my impressions and build upon a bunch of books also that have been written about the two cities. Now, let me off by saying that every year the city of Paris, different city, organizes an event called Paris Plage, the beach in Paris. This summer, Tel Aviv was the guest city, giving rise to an event called Tel Aviv sur Seine. The socialist mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, defended the event, arguing that Tel Aviv was not like Israel, that Tel Aviv represents the internal opposition in right-dominated national Israeli politics. Now, Hidalgo, of course, isn't alone. She played with the image of Tel Aviv as a modern, cosmopolitan, diverse, fun-loving, tolerant, and gay-positive city. A city embodying values contrary to the religious conservatism and gun-toting violence of settlers in the West Bank and Jerusalem. Now, as a white tourist with a Canadian passport, it is, and Karen will remind us of this, quite easy to immerse oneself in this Tel Aviv, which I don't think is just an illusion. However, it is not hard to see beyond and beneath this image if one tries just a bit. Now, in Paris itself, there was, of course, opposition to this event, Tel Aviv sur Seine. Organized by BDS France, above all, the protesters renamed the event Apartheid sur Seine. They pointed out that Tel Aviv is not an innocent, festival-like bubble set apart from the rest of Israel. Rather, it is at the heart of the country and bears responsibility for Israeli policies of occupation and segregation. Certainly, as Israel's global city, its center of finance, capital, and economic decision-making, Tel Aviv is intimately implicated in the ongoing colonial project of occupation in the West Bank and Jerusalem. One can try to forget about this, if one wants, as a tourist, but we certainly could not, coming to Tel Aviv from Ramallah. To us, Tel Aviv belonged to what we saw in Jerusalem and the West Bank, and what Kanishka just showed us. Of course, Tel Aviv has always been part of the state-building project that was and is Zionism. It is itself a product of an earlier and ongoing round of occupation, the one preceding 1967. Theodor Herzl, the most well-known of the early Zionist leaders and intellectuals, was clear that city building in general, and Tel Aviv in particular, was an essential part of constructing what he saw as the Jewish state, Israel. If one pays attention and does some preparation in Tel Aviv, it is not hard to come across evidence of this earlier round of occupation and its current manifestations. Quite a bit of this evidence is tied up in the relationship between Tel Aviv and Jaffa. In the late 19th century, Jaffa was the most important Palestinian city, a cosmopolitan and multi-confessional trading city linked to Palestinian agriculture and governed by the Ottoman Empire. The first neighborhoods of what is now Tel Aviv were developed separately from and away from what was then Jaffa. This separation was formalized under the British, when Jaffa and Tel Aviv became separate municipalities. but Tel Aviv began to exert its economic and political dominance. In 1950, after the Nakba of 1948, Jaffa was finally annexed by Tel Aviv. For Jaffa, this history eventually meant significant physical destruction and almost complete depopulation. 95% of Jaffa's population in 1948 was driven out. The old center of Jaffa, which you see here on this picture, was half destroyed, first by the British in 1936, and then by Jewish militias in 1948. After years of disinvestment, urban renewal, and segregation that followed annexation, Jaffa today is a complex mix of older working-class Jews, a large minority of Arab Israelis, and more recent Israeli gentrifiers. But it is not comparable to the Jaffa 100 years ago, or even the Jaffa in 1947. I will give you just one example of how cosmopolitan diversity and colonial settlement can be starkly juxtaposed in Tel Aviv. If you look towards the beach hotels and office towers of central Tel Aviv from what remains of old Jaffa, you see a stretch of land that appears like a buffer zone. In that zone, which is right in front of you on the picture, there's a lot of open space. There are vast parking lots, a park, the beach, alongside a renovated Ottoman train station, and an isolated mosque shadowed by anonymous hotel towers. The beach and the park feel remarkably different from the beaches further north on this picture here, which are heavily populated by the European and American tourists and the hip Tel Aviv residents that correspond more closely to Tel Aviv's image as a beach town. On this more southern stretch, one can see from the evening into the night what appears as the full gamut of Tel Aviv's social diversity. Largely separate groupings of Muslim Arabs, Russians, Africans, and South Asians hang out preparing barbecues, testing the waters, or just engaging in lively conversation. In this very zone, that transitional zone between the center of Tel Aviv and the old Jaffa, used to be the Jaffa neighborhood of Al-Manshia. Al-Manshia was cleared of most inhabitants by the radical Jewish militia, the Etzel or Irgun, in 1948, and then by the city of Tel Aviv during the 1950s. Much of the zone was rubble into the 1970s, and after the rubble was cleared, a museum was built for the very militia that was responsible for the destruction of the neighborhood. Opened in 1983, the museum, which you see here, is designed as a square glass box squeezed into the remains of 3 houses from the old Jaffa neighborhood. Etzel House, as it's called, to remember the Jewish militia, proudly exhibits the destruction symbolized by the ruins in order to celebrate, as it says on one of the plaques, the liberation of Jaffa. This most stark contrast of social plurality and aggressively celebrated colonial occupation hammers home points some have made about other places. For example, Abdul Malik Simon recently pointed out that territorial and cultural proximities between different populations do not necessarily facilitate collaboration and negotiation. And in the words of Craig Calhoun, the tolerance of diversity has always reflected, among other things, precisely the absence of need and opportunity to organize political self-rule. In the context of Jaffa itself, one may suggest, following the recent book by Daniel Monterescu, which just came out, that diversity in Jaffa and Tel Aviv is a form of forced or contrived coexistence produced by colonial occupation and socially differentiated settlement. Okay, well, let me finish with a partly more optimistic conclusion, partly. Certainly for a quick, on a quick visit, it appears that Tel Aviv is quite politicized still today, at least compared to some places, like Toronto. Signs of this politicization abound. It is evident that the various lines of political conflict in the city do not jive with the simple image of a tolerant party town. Strolling through various parts of South Tel Aviv makes this clear. Not far from the old Jaffa, in an area with a very visible African population, where Ariel Sharon's Operation Rainbow deported 115,000 foreign workers between 2002 and 2004, we saw one sign that seemed to point to neo-Nazi activity. It read, in Old German no less, foreigners out, Ausländer raus. Now the evening before, this is the picture on the left here, the evening before, we had come across a politically divergent sign against occupation. It wasn't quite clear which occupation, but occupation. This was a short distance away in Florentine, a working class and warehouse district, now populated also by young gentrifiers. Then, on our last night in Tel Aviv, we witnessed a large demonstration against two incidents that had taken place at the end of our stay in the West Bank. A religious fanatic had stabbed participants at the Jerusalem Pride Parade, killing one. And settlers in the West Bank, associated with the fascist Koch party, set fire to a Palestinian house just outside of Ramallah, killing 3. The demonstration in Tel Aviv protested both events. So Tel Aviv does seem to generate certain kinds of progressive political capacity still today, despite everything. This was certainly a hopeful sign. But to us outsiders, it was not clear to us if or in what ways these protests addressed not only the obvious brutalities of settler violence and religious fanaticism in Jerusalem and the West Bank, but also the deeper layers of colonial occupation and ethnicized social inequality in Tel Aviv and the rest of Israel itself.